Hello, everybody. Jacob Jans here with the Writers Workshop at Authors Publish. Today, I'm pleased to present a lecture on how to publish your writing in literary journals. This is part of our monthly lecture series that presents talks on the craft of writing or the business of publishing. Today, I'm very excited to be presenting the editors of Radar Poetry, a wonderful online literary journal that I've been a fan of for many years. The editors, Dara Lynn Schrager and Rachel Marie Patterson, have been publishing both established and emerging writers since 2013. And both of them have widely published their own poems. In addition to her many publications, Rachel is the recipient of an Academy of American Poets Prize. Her full-length collection, Tall Grass with Violence, is forthcoming from Future Cycle Press in 2022. Dara's full-length collection, Whiskey X-Ray Yankee, was published by Barrow Street, and it was also a finalist for their prize. In addition to widely publishing her poetry, Dara has also written articles for the New York Times, the Philadelphia Inquirer, among other places. Radar Poetry is a long-time collaboration between these two poets and a wonderful literary journal. If you haven't yet read it, I encourage you to take a look after the lecture. So today, Rachel and Dara will be presenting a talk on how to publish your writing in literary journals. Rachel and Dara, being longtime editors of an established and respected literary journal, as well as widely publishing their own writing for quite some time, they have a lot of insider knowledge and experience that I'm sure you will find both enlightening and valuable, whether or not you are just getting started engaging with the literary journal community, or if you have already regularly published your writing in literary journals. I'm sure you'll find this lecture very interesting and valuable. So welcome, Rachel and Dara, and thank you for being here.
Thank you, Jacob. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
So we thought we would begin today. I'm Dara.
And I'm Rachel. And we wanted to introduce one another because, as Jacob mentioned, our project is very collaborative and we kind of come as a package. So this is my wonderful friend, Dara, and my co-editor and co-poet. Dara is, of course, the co-founder and editor of Radar with me. Her book is Whiskey X-Ray Yankee. As Jacob mentioned, it came out 2 years ago, almost 3 years ago, from Barrow Street Press. There it is. Look at that beautiful cover too. And she's been published all over, but on top of all that, she just is a fabulous poet, a fabulous editor, a fabulous friend, and I'm thrilled to be presenting with her, as always.
And I'd like to just say that I'm a genius for deciding to work with Rachel so many years ago on Radar. It was a project that she and I decided to join forces to do after having been friends and helping each other edit our work for a number of years and feeling like there was sort of something missing in our experience as poets trying to get published and successfully getting published. We wanted to have an inclusive and accessible platform for writers at every level. And so together we've really enjoyed building Radar to the success that we are now enjoying and hope to continue for many years. It has been nothing short of, it's a highlight of my life to work on this project with Rachel. So we are so excited to be here with all of you today and to just give you a little glimpse behind the scenes of what we do and how we think and have learned things work in the literary journal publishing world.
Absolutely. So, sort of as an invocation to get us started, we wanted to start by sharing a poem that we love just to get everybody in the literary mindset.
So I'm just going to read Hurricane by Yona Harvey as a mood setter for today. And this is a poem that I am just currently loving from her book, Hemming the Water. Hurricane. 4 tickets left, I let her go, firstborn into a hurricane. I thought she escaped the floodwaters. No, but her head is empty of the drowned for now, though she took her first breath below sea level. Ah, and ah, and ah, mama, let me go, she speaks, what every smart child knows. To get grown, you unlash your hands from the groan and up and up and up and up. She turns, latched into the seat of a hurricane. You let your girl what? You let your girl what? I did, so she do. I did, so she do. So girl, you can ride a hurricane, and she do, and she do, and she do, and she do. She do make my river an ocean. Memorial, Baptist, Protestant birth, my girl walked away from a hurricane, and she do, and she do, and she do, and she do take my hand a while longer. The haunts in my pocket, I'll keep to a hum. Katrina was a woman I knew. When you were an infant, she rained on you. And she do, and she do, and she do, and she do.
I love that poem.
Yeah, me too.
And in addition to that sort of invocational poem, we also wanted to share one of our favorite quotes from Mary Oliver. I simply do not distinguish between work and play. And that's so important to us as we get into this whole conversation or lecture that we're going to have about publishing your writing. I think it's so important to understand and remember that although it is work, and although you want to be professional in the way that you present yourself, in the way that you write, in your writing practices, which we'll talk about, and in how you submit to journals, it should also be what you love, and it should also be joyful for you. Just as Radar is both a professional and a passion project for Dara and myself. So without further ado, let's talk a little bit about Radar before we get started. We have mentioned a few things, but just so you're aware fully of where we're coming from and what our perspective is as editors. As we mentioned earlier, Radar was established in 2013. So we've been doing this at Radar for about 8 years. One of our signature projects is that we administer the Coniston Prize for women poets or poets who identify as women. And we're so thrilled this year that our judge is actually Yona Harvey, whose poem we just heard. So that is so exciting to us. We love her work. And you can check out all information about that on our website. We use the Submittable platform at Radar, and that might be relevant to you because as you get further and deeper into the submission process, you'll learn there are a couple of big platforms that people use. Submittable is one. Duotrope is an emerging platform. Some journals obviously are still using paper. Some journals are still accepting email, but in general, there's a major movement toward these electronic platforms, and Submittable is probably the most pervasive one at this point. So we know a lot about Submittable if you have those types of questions, and we'll cover it. And then finally, we wanted to talk a little bit about why we started Radar and our mission. Dara, do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Sure. So it's actually pretty straightforward. We sat down at my kitchen table in Princeton, New Jersey, and said, how can we get on the field? How can we play? We don't just want to be poets. We want to contribute in another way, on another level to poetry. There's academia, there's, the rest of the poets who aren't in academia. We consider ourselves not in academia, although we have advanced degrees. So we literally decided, without any support except each other's and no money, that we would simply launch the journal. Rachel did all of the coding and design work for the journal. We collaborated on all of our creative ideas. Radar is actually our two names, Rachel and Dara. together, radar, and we think the word radar resonates deeply for us and for people who've joined our community in terms of what we do in broadcasting our mission and the work that we choose to share. All of the decisions at Radar are made jointly. Every single little decision that we have made and every single poem and piece of artwork that is published is a joint decision that Rachel and I make together. So it's truly collaborative, has been since the beginning. The only changes we've made over the years are to be open to changes in society, but in terms of our mission and our values, nothing has changed for us. And that seems to be the key to our success. We always know why we're here and why we're doing the work. And when it can seem like we have mountains of it, we remind ourselves of that original mission and that we are honoring it by staying true to what we set out to do. Of course, it's exciting that the journal is getting more and more popular and more widely known, but it still feels the same to us. It feels like a gift to be able to provide a platform to other writers.
Mm-hmm. And certainly in line with all of those intentions and those values. As writers, now that we have become editors and we've been doing this for a period of time, you come to learn and understand so much about how things work behind the scenes. So now when I send out my own work, I can project or think about how it will be received, where it will be received, who's reading it, how they're reading it, all of those things which we're going to touch on and talk about, and being open and transparent about that and sharing what we've learned and what our experience is with you is all in line with that mission of wanting to be accessible and transparent. So let's get into it.
Yeah. So pandemic poetry, what does that mean? We don't mean poems about the pandemic. No. We mean that we have seen an incredible increase in the number and quality of submissions over the past year and couple months. Things started to change as editors. We noticed people were writing more, writing better, sending more polished work. We started to notice on social media, other editors talking about this phenomenon as well. So to say that poetry is alive and well is a very true statement right now. It used to feel like we were sort of hoping that people would believe that. Now we can tell you with 100% assurity that it is really having a moment. Poetry is having a moment. Art is having a moment. And that's good news for everyone who writes and everyone who wants to participate in that world. Mm-hmm. Rachel?
Yeah, I mean, specifically in our experience, and again, we publish poetry and read poetry. I do think that this also extends to other genres as well. But in our experience at Radar, for a glimpse of what we're seeing, we had a 50% increase in the number of submissions to our summer contest in the summer of 2020 than we did in the summer of 2019. So that's the level of difference that we saw, which is huge. And I do think that that's pretty consistent across the board in our experience communicating with other editors. This is not a unique experience. This is the new normal. So as Dara said, it's great news for the art world and the poetry world and the writing world. But it also means that the bar has been set high. And so it's very important to understand the climate into which you're stepping when you submit your work right now, and to be aware of that in terms of the quality of your submission and how you target your submissions and where you select to send your work, which we will talk about. Is there anything you wanted to add, Dara, about?
No, I'm anxious to get to the next slide so we can answer the question that I'm hoping people are asking themselves, which is, well, what am I supposed to do about any of that? Mm-hmm. So what do you do about any of that? One way that you can approach this new normal is to enhance your rituals and practices for writing. This means come up with some very solid ways that you prepare work to send out to be considered by journals. You know, for some people that's a daily practice. For some people it happens sporadically given whatever else is going on in their lives. But there are many sort of kind of tips we can share with you about how we approach developing and cultivating rituals and practices so that when we send our work out, We feel that we've sent out work that is strong, that there's a reason why the pieces we send together are together. Whether those reasons are apparent to the editor or not, we have an explanation for why those pieces are together and where we send them. We spend a lot of time on deciding that by reading other journals, reading other poets. Always look to see where poets you like are publishing. In the back of, anybody's book, there'll be an acknowledgement section and they'll list the journals where their poems have been published. That's a very good resource for you. So I love Honore Jeffers. So if I can pick 6 journals that poems from the Gospel of Barbecue have been published in, that's a good practice for me for identifying journals that might be a good fit for my work. Not that I write like Honore Jeffers, but I would like to keep company with her poems. So it's an aspirational approach that works for me. And Rachel, I think you were going to share a ritual, wasn't it? A ritual? Yeah.
Yeah. So I think it's equally important to have rituals and practices that reinforce your writing habits. Because as Dara mentioned, if you don't have content, then we shouldn't even talk about submitting. And by the way, when you start submitting, you should submit with the anticipation that your work is going to get selected and published. And guess what? Now it's off the market. So you need something new. You need to be continually writing to be replenishing that well of work. And so one of the rituals that I practice is that I have a specific time set aside. It used to be daily, but I have kids now, so it is weekly. And it's a specific hour or a couple of hours where I know this is my time to write. I don't make appointments at that time. I don't distract myself at that time. I do my very best. I don't look at my email. I don't look at my phone. I'm not surfing the internet. That is my time to write. And even if I can't write anything, I will stare at that blank page. And let me tell you, there is nothing better for writer's block than forcing yourself to stare at the blank document. Guess what? You're going to write something if you don't give in to the temptation to go on Wikipedia or whatever else that you do to kill time. So having that established time also allows me to treat my writing as a professional pursuit, just as I would in my work life outside of poetry, just as I would be assigned a project, have a deadline, and then set aside time to meet that deadline. I treat my poetry the same way, so that I feel that it's being given the appropriate space and time to flourish. If you don't give yourself that space, it will be very difficult to succeed.
So I'm less strict with myself because I do yoga and I believe in forgiveness. So my approach is slightly different from Rachel's. I love rituals. I love thinking of myself as always listening. So the voice in my head that speaks to me throughout the day is one that says, just keep listening, keep looking. So I'm looking and I'm listening, and I sometimes picture myself as a child because there's a sense of wonder. But what I'm doing is I'm trying to accumulate information. I'm not writing it down, but I'm accumulating sensory experiences that end up in drafts of poems. So things sort of work their way in, and then they sort of simmer in there, and then eventually they make their way in some form onto the page, not as a complete poem, but I trust that process of wondering and wandering to lead me to work. I also rely on text. So this book, The Practice of Poetry, edited by Robin Ben and Chase Twitchell, is a current favorite of mine. You can see all my sticky notes. This book contains literal exercises for writers to stimulate the process of generating material. So you can go from that blank page that Rachel gives herself time with, and if nothing's coming, you can open a book like this, which contains writing exercises, and just try one. And if it doesn't resonate, try another. And if you hate this book, guess what? There are plenty of others. This is Best Words, Best Order by Stephen Dobbins. This is Essays on Poetry. I read a book like this and it stirs something in me. The way he speaks about the process of discovering poetry for himself stirs that response in me. And then the other one I just have with me today to mention is Private Poets' Worldly Acts. And this book, by Kevin Stein, is public and private history in contemporary American poetry. This kind of book reminds me of why what I'm doing feels important, that there's a relevance to what I'm doing and there's a necessity to it. So there are plenty of ways to use text to help you develop rituals and practices. And another is simply by reading other people's books of poetry. I always have stacks of people's books around and I'm just reading to see things that I love. And that makes me want to write. So rituals and practices is,
Another favorite of mine is The Triggering Town by Richard Hugo, which I don't have to hold up
great.
because I'm not as well prepared as Sarah, but it's a fabulous resource as well. And there's tons of these. I'm sure that you can come up with 10 more of your own.
Triggering Town. Yeah, Richard Hugo. Yeah.
Always have these resources at your disposal. It's just a great idea to never be alone and critical of yourself when you can always go out, right? You can always have a resource. You can always have something there that interests you. And it goes back to that quote that we opened with about work and play, that this should still be joyful. And it is work because you're professional, but it's also what you're passionate about.
Connecting to what matters to you. That's what you should be feeling. But let's go to the next slide and get down to some brass tacks here. So what to send? So Rachel and I, as you probably are starting to realize, read hundreds of poetry submissions a month, right? A week? I don't know, Rachel, what's the number at this point?
It's
hundreds a month.
Hundreds a month, certainly. And sometimes hundreds a week, depending on.
Yes. And these range from, I believe we accept 4 to 6 poems per entry, right?
3 to 5.
3 to 5. Okay. I was so close. So
4 to 6.
imagine.
Guidelines are changing, and this is why you should pay attention.
Yes.
Because so many editors are adapting their guidelines to meet the new needs
Yes.
of what's coming in.
So I think it's safe to say that we read a lot of poetry. And we read poetry from, as Jacob mentioned in his wonderful introduction, emerging poets, meaning people who haven't been published ever or very much, or have no education in poetry. And we read poems by famous people. For us, it's great because we read blind, so we don't actually know who you are. We don't care until we decide if we're taking your work, we need to find that out. So we will read your bio. But at the time that we're opening your submission and reading it, we have no idea who you are. So what are we looking for? What are literary journals looking for? How do you know what to send? So this is a very abbreviated list on your screen. Only your best work, meaning this is a professional endeavor. Don't say, let me find out if these people feel the way I feel about hot dogs and send them a limerick about hot dogs. The answer is no. Don't send me that unless my journal is called Hot Dogs, because you're taking a risk there. You're making a decision that is not really in keeping with sort of the values you've established for yourself as a professional, right? So you want to send your best work. You want to feel like it's as polished as you're going to get it for the time being, so that it's, finished is a very difficult word. It's not finished, but you feel that it's been through enough iterations that it's ready to go out into the world. And you're not going to send anything crazy, because the odds of that landing it's a game of odds, right? And so the odds are a bit low if you're going to send the hot dog limerick. Rachel, do you want to build on that?
Well, first of all, I can't wait for all the hot dog poems that we're going to
sorry.
as a result of this. And I can't actually, one of the things Dara and I love is to be surprised. And so I can't wait to eat my words when I read the most amazing hot dog poem that brings a tear to my eye in the next couple of months. But I think Dara is exactly right. And to build on that, we are in a little bit going to talk about theme issues and thinking about what journal you're submitting to, because there might be a place for a poem that you consider to be, or if you're writing another genre, a piece that you consider to be like the hot dog limerick. You just have to be thoughtful about where you place that kind of work. And you don't want to just blanket send it everywhere, because you're going to lose some of your credibility in that way. So an important way to think about this, I think, is in terms of your credibility. When an editor opens up your manuscript and starts reading, they want to feel, Dara and I talk about this all the time, we want to feel that somebody knew Radar before they sent us work, and they thought about sending us something that was congruous with what we publish, right?
Well, Okay, caveat. There is a well-known poet who gives a lot of talks about how he never looks at any journal before he sends, that his approach is more of a crapshoot approach, and he believes it's more of a game of numbers and it really doesn't matter. And I think that's fine. We do have an aesthetic. We're not ashamed of that. It's not that we're constantly expanding the boundaries of what we do at Radar, and we want people to challenge us, but we aren't going to publish the hot dog limerick. So it's like you have to be reasonable about it. If you want to take that approach where you're just sending and kissing it up to God, okay. But because of the amount of time we put in, we like to feel like you sent to us not by accident. There was some reason why Radar is to whom your submission is addressed.
Well, certainly. And it's certainly possible that you might happen without reading a journal to send them something they love.
Absolutely.
And I'm sure that happens. Absolutely. But for us, I mean, it's all philosophy, right? Our personal philosophy of writing, sending work, and also as editors reading work is that it's quality over quantity. I'm selective about where I send my work. I don't just blanket send it everywhere, because personally, the way that I feel is that I want to make sure that I'm going to be published in a journal or a publication that I'm proud to be in, and where I'm alongside poets that I love, and I want to be able to cultivate that experience. And so I need to know something about the journal before I submit there.
Yeah, we're a community. You do not get published in Radar and then just
No.
disappear. We pair artwork with poetry. We're in contact with the artists and the poets. We make the choices about what goes with what. It's a relationship that we begin when we accept something from you. And when you have a success down the road, we publicize that on social media if we have access to that. We are in relationship. We truly believe that with the people we publish. So if you're going to join our community, we don't want it to be by mistake. Yes, there are happy accidents, but in general, it is a good idea if you are looking to have success to do a little research about where you send, so that you don't end up somewhere you don't want to be. All right, we should move on because it's 2:28. So cohesive group.
Yes. And by the way, that's not just Radar that builds those kinds of communities. If you are submitting to a journal, you should be prepared to join their community.
Right. Now, this slide, as I look at it, I'm going to say I also disagree with it, even though we made it. There are two approaches. You can send a cohesive group. This is for poems, but it would apply to short stories and short shorts. I think you should be able to explicate, if asked, why the poems you sent were sent together. It doesn't mean they have to be related or seem to have anything in common, but you have to have had a reason. They weren't just the 5 that were left type thing. Because I constantly say to Rachel, when we get a submission that I'm struggling with, I feel like this person just sent us the dregs, their last 5 poems they had. That's a common refrain. And Rachel will then say, why do you say that? That might not be the case. I'm sensitive to that. I want to believe that the person put thought into why they sent the poems together that they sent, that they were trying to create a mood or build something in me or leave me with something. Having said that, I'll also say it's not necessary. And you absolutely can have success sending random poems that have been grouped together randomly, and 1 gets picked up or 2 gets picked up. So, either follow this advice or don't. Rachel.
I think that advice is accurate because it also depends on where you're submitting. So again, it goes back to this knowing the journal. And if some journals tend to be much more rangy in both the subject matter and the forms that they publish, while others are more narrow. And so if you're aware of what kind of stuff they're interested in and what they like, you're going to be making a more informed decision about what you send them. It's not going to be random and just see what happens. Yeah. We also always recommend that generally you send the highest number of poems, but I'm also going to contradict that and say at Radar, let's say we take 3 to 5 poems. We would love to read 5 poems from everyone because we want to see all of what you have to offer. But at the same time, if you don't have 5 poems that are really finished and polished, or this applies to other genres as well, don't send work that isn't finished, and don't send work. And you know what drives an editor crazy? And this isn't just us, it is most editors, is to submit work and 2 weeks later say there's an edit or there's a revision or I want to change this, or even have a poem accepted. as it was on the page. And then after the acceptance, tell me, oh, well, I've revised it since then. Well, why did you send me work that wasn't complete? Unless it's
Also, just understand, I mean, this just happened to me. Someone accepted earlier versions of poems. It's okay. I mean, they're still mine. They'll be published in that form in this journal, and I'm very grateful. And if I do have another book come out, they may be in a later form. It's not a permanent and only one shot thing, right? I'm developing as a writer as the days go by, and that may show in what of mine is out in the world. So it's not something to worry about.
No. Okay. Guidelines. This should go without saying, but you should always be very aware of the guidelines when you submit to a journal. And this particularly goes back to what Dara was talking about reading blind. At the very least, you should know if the journal that you're submitting to, it has a blind reading process. Many of them do, including Radar. And let me tell you what drives us absolutely crazy at Radar is when somebody clearly has not read our guidelines and they submit a document of poems to us that has their name on the top in the header on every page.
We can't read it because it's our code. Our code of ethics doesn't allow for us to have that information. So we feel like we've missed out on an opportunity to read that person's work because they didn't take that extra minute to familiarize themselves with our guidelines, which are also often a reflection of the values of the publication.
Mm-hmm. There will also be other publications, by the way, who require you to put your name on it or to number pages, or they require certain fonts, font sizes, font colors, or specific Times New Roman font, even some of them. Please be conscious of these things and follow the guidelines, because you should assume that your readers notice. They do.
And they're doing that to try to economize their time. They're not trying to make life difficult for you. They're doing it because Radar is a journal in which there are only 2 readers, and that's the 2 editors. But many journals use students or have editors who work for them, and they want everything to be given in the same way to everyone who's reading so that it's fair. So that you know, that's what guidelines really are for, is to try to keep things fair for everybody. But we should quickly just talk about turnaround time, because lately they've been getting longer. This is what we mean about poetry being alive and well. I mean, I have gone through this myself, where I am waiting way longer, months and months longer than I'm used to waiting to hear back from certain publications. People are inundated. Most people don't make a living doing this. It is, we are not wearing furs. It is not, you know, a profession for those who desire wealth. So the times are getting longer because the volume's higher, and it's just people trying to read and put these journals together. So allow for that when you send work out. If you have something that you desperately need in the world by August, you better put some filters on your search to find out, you know, where. I can think of Autumn House Daily is a website that publishes a poem every single day on their website. If you really have that need, find journals that you like that offer something like that.
Mm-hmm, absolutely. And I think that you should be very aware of turnaround time and read materials before you send, so that you are querying at the appropriate time, and not reaching out before the stated time frame of when editors read work. Make sure you also know how to get in touch with those editors if you need to, especially in the case of partial withdrawals. Let's say you sent 5 poems or 2 pieces of prose, one of them gets accepted. Please reach out timely that day, if possible, to any other editor that's considering your work, because we can tell you from experience that, frankly, nothing will upset an editor more than loving a poem, reaching out, having that relationship with the poem, and anticipating bringing that poet or that writer into their community of writers, and then finding out that it was accepted 3 months ago and nobody told us.
It just wastes our time. You're taking a space that you're not even going to use. So on Submittable, it's easy to withdraw. That's why we like that platform, but you can do it through a spreadsheet if you don't want to be on Submittable. You can do it on a piece of paper. Just keep very good track of where you send when, and make sure to withdraw if something's accepted. Mm-hmm. Okay, we should press on.
We've touched on this a little bit, but pay special attention to a lot of literary journals, especially now, actually. I think we're sort of in a theme moment in the literary journal universe. Dara and I even toyed with the idea of a theme, although we're not following through quite yet. But there are a lot of theme issues going on and a lot of calls for theme work. And that includes anthologies too, by the way, which you should be looking for and thinking about. And so if you're going to select work to send out to theme issues and contests, you should really be aware that that work truly fits the theme that they are asking for. Don't try to shoehorn an existing poem into a theme or an existing story or essay into a theme that is not truly relevant to the subject matter of the work.
And I like Entropy Entropy is a website that I have discovered some theme issues on. There are many resources. Authors Publish, I believe, offers that, and
Pages is a good one, and also
Duotrope. Yeah, but if you really feel like you're writing about something or around a certain topic, or the color red keeps coming up, maybe you should look for a contest or a theme issue somewhere, because maybe there is a place where that work would be particularly would get special notice. You know, it's why not? Again, it's like, it's not the only time only opportunity you're going to get to publish. So why not see if there is a home for certain pieces that seem to be together for some reason?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
We talked about reading blind, but it really is one of our sticking points. You should know if the journal that you're submitting to reads blind, and you should prepare accordingly. Don't put your name on something that they're going to open and read if they read blind. If they don't read blind, that's fine too. But you should be thoughtful about that process. Don't go into it without knowing. We talked a little bit about this too. Make sure that you really know who you're submitting to. That's what we recommend. Look, we know there are other ways of doing things. We respect those approaches, but we see it differently personally as editors and poets. As Dara mentioned, you'll have those dream journals. A great way to find those dream journals, besides reading them, is looking in the back of those books that you love. Follow those dream journals on social media. We love the interaction that we have with our readers and audience on social media at Radar. Social media is another thing that has exploded during the pandemic. So things really in the last year or two have taken a major uptick, and there's a lot of interaction.
Journal by their actions and reactions to things on social media. And it helps me a lot in determining, you know, where to send my work. And we at Radar are unbelievably delighted by our interactions with people in our community on social media. We've gotten to know people so much better. So there is so much support out there through social media for writers. So if you haven't started the process of discovering who to follow, start today. Even if you just find one today, you will be thrilled at you know, the dividends on the time spent.
Mm-hmm. And we mentioned earlier a couple of those websites for poets or writers generally, and submitters, Duotrope, Entropy, Authors Publish, of course. Trish Hopkinson runs a wonderful website that's primarily for poets. New Pages works with every genre. I didn't list them there, but they're a good one as well. These are the kind of places where you should be going and looking and following them on social media to the extent that they have social media. So not just the journals themselves, but also these sort of resources that are going to help you figure out where your work belongs and what community you want to belong to.
Okay, let's try to quickly get through this so we can get to some questions if there are any. So cover letter, this seems a bit dry, but I mean, we've gotten some doozies. So you don't want to turn editors off by writing something like, I only eat hot dogs and here's my limerick about them. Love, Josh. So, you know, just be professional. I mean, you don't have to be boring. Some people say adorable, cute things because they're witty. I mean, so why not use it? But just keep the basics in there, the titles of the poems, just in case, you know, they get confused clicking on and off a screen. If these are part of a larger project, a book or an internship or a residency or a statue, I don't care, whatever it is, mention that so that you're connecting the work you've sent to something else that you're doing. Anything you can say about that journal, if you genuinely have something to say that's nice, say it, because we're not in a vacuum. We'd love to hear if there's something that really resonated with you, mention it to us. We'll be delighted to make that connection. It doesn't mean we're going to take your work, but it's going to make us feel good. And we thank you for that. All editors like to think people know they're humans. And then you can list some prior publications. I mean, don't go on and on. You don't even need to really, but if you want to mention a few, you can. And yeah, and then if you can, with all of that, if you still have something witty to say, by all means, or you can just sign off and it'll be appreciated. It's a 2-second thing. The editor looks at it for 2 seconds. So they want to grab your name, if they've taken it, the title of the pieces, the project you're working on, something about you.
Yeah, and for poetry journals or other journals that read blind as we do, we don't look at cover letters until you've already passed
After
the first round. So don't put anything in your cover letter that's like necessary to the reading of the work. First of all, the work should speak for itself, so that should never be there. But remember that the purpose of your cover letter is not to explain what the work is about. It's to introduce yourself so that later, for example, if Dara and I were reading work, we got past the first round and now we're thinking about accepting the poems. Now we want to get to know you. So that's the
yeah. You know what, Ray, in the interest of time, skip the next one and just go to tiered rejections.
Yeah. We've
okay.
answered.
Yeah. So this, just to go over this, please understand there is so much sincerity in a tiered rejection. Do not read it as a flat no. If some editor has taken the time to tell you that they especially liked your limerick about hot dogs, or that your limerick about hot dogs almost made it, don't read that and go, oh, I can't believe it, that's torture. Understand that they took the time, which they don't have a lot of, to say to you, hey, you're pretty damn good, and this was pretty damn close. If the editor then invites you to submit again and gives you a time period, move that to the top of your list of priorities in life, because you are so close. And it can take a few, I went through 3 rounds with a journal I really wanted to be in years ago. And on the 4th round, they took a poem. And I would have given up if it weren't for Rachel telling me, no, this is straight information here. Tiered rejection. He's asking you for more, she helped me clarify, get the emotion out. So a tiered rejection is to be taken very seriously and to be noted. And you should congratulate yourself for getting one, frankly.
Mm-hmm. As editors, now we understand, before I started editing, I didn't fully grasp what went into that. It is so much work and labor that goes into reading. And when you see something that makes it close, remember the extremely small number of stuff that gets accepted and just how special it is, even that you were in that range. Tiered rejections, by the way, can still be form in that they might not specifically mention a poem, but if it says, we enjoyed your work, we read your work with interest, we encourage you to submit again, don't take that as a form rejection. That is a tiered rejection, and that is a genuine invitation to submit again.
Okay.
We made it.
4 minutes over what we wanted, but yeah.
We had a lot of information. Oh, Jacob, I think you're on mute.
Thank you so much, Rachel and Dara. That was great.
Sure.
We already have a lot of questions that people have been asking. So I have some questions as well. So I've not ever used Submittable as an editor. And I've always been really curious what you see in terms of Submittable on your end. What does the interface look like for you when you get a submission?
So what the interface looks like for us is essentially, so in Submittable, editors can make different forms, which basically means, for example, if I were a journal that accepted poetry, fiction, nonfiction, and artwork, I'd make a form for each one. Mm-hmm. And as an editor, when I go in on the back end, I can filter by all sorts of controls. So I can filter by form. I just want to read the poetry right now. I just want to read the fiction. I can filter by date. I just want to read things that were submitted in the last 7 days, or I only want to read things that are aged more than 2 weeks, whatever it is. I can also Submittable has the option to control to make things blind so that you can't even accidentally see somebody's cover letter, which is a very useful tool for editors. That's an option in Submittable. And the reason that we really like Submittable is because it's very easy not only to control what you're seeing and take it in digestible chunks, because we get a big number of subs, but also it's really easy to communicate with the poets on Submittable. So there's a messaging feature that looks probably very similar to what it looks like for you as the submitter. When I'm reading your work, if I want to send you a message, I can do that. If you want to send me a message to say, hey, there's been a partial withdrawal, I have to take one poem out, we can see it right away, and it's not going to be a mystery.
You're forgetting one of the main reasons we decided to do it in the first place was it allows Rachel and I to communicate with each other. There's a note section that's private between us. So we leave each other notes on many submissions saying, hey, just want to make sure you really look at this, or, whatever it is, it gives us a way to be in conversation throughout the days, weeks, months, and years that we're looking at submissions together.
So if you get a submission you're really serious about, you might put a note on there saying, hey, Rachel, hey, Dara, take a look at this. And then that's interesting.
I mean, we both look at all of them, but it helps to get the nudge from the other editor saying, the third poem in this packet, I just want to make sure you just really get to it. I'm excited or want to know what you think. Sometimes we don't tell each other why, but
yeah,
a little bit of a game, but it's just been very helpful because there are two of us.
Another question that someone asked is, if you do get a tiered rejection, is there a particular way to follow up or to remind the editor of that when you submit again?
Yes. Excellent question. Yes, you will say in your cover letter,
yes,
as you so generously suggested or offered, I am sending work again on, within the 6 months, or whatever language they use, put back to them in your response to jog their memory that they asked you for work.
Just a brief mention that they asked for it again.
Yeah, I would use their exact words if possible.
Okay, that's a good tip. The exact words if
Yeah,
possible.
because
Okay.
that's what's going to resonate and really make sense. You don't want them to wonder what you meant.
Yeah, because I imagine as you're going through submissions, usually you've already, when you're reading a submission, you've just read 20 others, so your brain
You just read 200 others.
Yeah.
So if someone says you really loved my hot dog limerick and suggested that I send you new work before July 1st, so here it is, I will remember who you are immediately. If you just say you suggested I send again, I have to go back through and try to figure out who you were and what you sent and why I said that to you.
That makes sense. So you mentioned following editors on social media. Have you found that editors tend to be on one platform more than another? Is there a...
So I would follow the journals typically on social media. You may follow specific editors. That's kind of a different endeavor in many ways. But when you're following journals on social media, I tend to think, although Dara, you'll weigh in on this and see if you disagree with me, that different journals, depending on both their aesthetics and sort of the circumstances of their editors, gravitate toward different platforms. So for
their age, she doesn't want to say it, but
I don't want to say age, but I do want to say that just for what it's worth, Radar, I happen to be a more tech savvy editor, I think, than some others. And we are very active on Instagram. We also, however, though, keep in mind our visual publication. We publish artwork too. So Instagram is a great platform for us. For a journal that might be more no artwork, it's all, or a lot of the paper journals, we're active on Twitter. So it's really going to depend on the circumstances of that journal or that platform, and also how they want to interact with people and how you want to interact with them. We are active across all Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter, but I would say we're the most active on Instagram.
Okay. And then for each journal, it just depends on where they're at, I suppose.
It does. You can check them out. I would Google them, go to their website. They're going to have links to their social media on their website. Check them out. See where they are active. Also, think about yourself. Where do I want to be active? A lot of Poets particularly, I have found, are very active on Twitter, poets themselves. Because if you think about it, that
Wordsmiths, they
yeah,
love Twitter.
exactly. It's a perfect space for somebody who likes to be brief and powerful.
Yeah.
But see where that journal is active. You'll get a sense by looking. And by the way, you'll also get a sense of the ones that you click and you see their last post was from 2017. Well, then you know, okay, this is, they're old school. And that's okay too. It's not that that's a negative, but just be aware that's not the way to connect with them particularly.
Another question on a different topic. A lot of people asked, and this is something that has frustrated me as well, as you want to submit to print journals, but you can't necessarily buy all the print journals you want to submit to, and you also can't, and because of that, you can't read them. So how do you get a sense of what to send these journals if you're not able to read them?
I still go to the bookstore and read. I mean, I submitted to a print journal that I'm going to be in that I found at a bookstore that's affiliated with a university. So they had a pretty nice selection of print journals, which is, I don't know if Barnes and Noble does, but certainly independent bookstores, some of them focus on that. So I will periodically do that.
You can also go to their websites. They almost always, I can't think of one that doesn't, will have samples from their recent issues.
Yeah.
They know this issue. The other thing that I would recommend is go in your local library, because and if your library doesn't have it, talk to your librarian. They can get it. This is not rocket science, right? They can absolutely get it if there's interest from their audience. And then that's a great way to be aware of those journals. And certainly if you have any connection with a school, whether it's a secondary school or a university, their libraries are almost always stocked with these types of books.
But a lot of journals now have an online version and a print version, and you can get a sense of the culture of the organization from their online version. It's not the same as their print version, but it at least gets you a little bit familiar. So it's a good place to start.
From listening to your lecture earlier, it seems to me that as long as you're sort of within the range of an aesthetic, it's okay to be a little bit off one way or another.
Oh, yes.
You just
Please,
want to sort of
please be
the
off.
right-
We
the right
live
zone.
off. Yeah, I mean, it's boring to read, 200 submissions and nothing sort of sparks. So you be the spark, but just, not the hot dog limerick spark.
Something I've done in my submissions is I'll have 3 poems that are really tightly connected, and then another one that's just way out there. And I found that to be successful sometimes. Is that something you encounter very often when reading?
I think we often see poems or packets where there's an obvious connection between a few of the poems and then maybe 1 or 2 outliers. And I think we've taken from those packets, certainly. Like them when we read them, absolutely. I think I've submitted things like that myself, and I know Dara has. So I think that those are all good. I think the key is that we were talking about earlier, you should know what you sent, and you should have some kind of reason in your mind why you did it. If you can imagine being an editor, and if you can imagine seeing it and liking it, great. If you haven't thought about that at all, that's where you're going to run into issues, I think.
Because we ask each other. Rachel will say to me, or I'll say to her, why do you think he sent these 3 and then these 2 outliers? Do you think he was trying to show us his range? And she may say, no, I think he sees the connect. We will talk about that and we will note that. So that's why we're asking for you to be intentional about that choice, because if we're trying to figure out why you made it, it would be nice to believe that you actually had thought about that too.
And be intentional about the order too. So if you have 3 connected poems and 2 outliers, well, it would make a lot of sense for the 3 connected poems to appear in sequence and then the 2 outliers, or vice versa. But to have one sequence poem, 1 outlier, 1 sequence poem, that's going to create unnecessary
distraction.
Right. Inefficiency for a reader. Oh, wait a minute. I'm at the 3rd poem and this seems connected to the 1st poem. Let me go back. You don't want to create that kind of detriment to an editor. Don't make it hard for them to understand. You want to make it easy because they have a lot to read.
Yeah. We got another question from a Danae, and she's 19 years old, a younger poet. She's wondering about her chances in terms of getting published.
Chances are good, Danae.
You got lots of time, which is great. And you know what? We've published teenage poets. In fact, I'm trying to remember, Dare. We have 30 issues now, which is fantastic. But we certainly have published poets who are in college on multiple
High
occasions.
school, we published a high schooler.
One in high school, which was and she's phenomenal.
It doesn't matter. Here's the great thing. If journals are really keeping their word and reading blind, and they don't know you're 19. So the work is the work. It stands for itself. It does its own thing in the world. If you feel strongly about it, and if you've gotten pieces to the point that you feel, or someone you trust has told you it might be a time to send them out, start sending them out. You do learn from the process of being rejected if that's what happens. It's not a waste of time to be rejected. It is a learning process. We all go through it. They're on many levels, and it's another lecture. It's a learning process. So, the sooner you get started, the closer you'll be to your ultimate goal.
Definitely.
Another question, what do you consider to be previously published? I know a lot of writers, maybe they write a poem on their blog and then they remove it.
Published. No, it's previously published.
Don't get Rachel started. This is a thing for Ray. Go ahead, Ray.
No, it's okay. And it's important though, right? Because as editors, what are we asking for from you? Because to me, we're asking a lot. And I love your work so much. I am so enthusiastic about this poem that I want to be the very first place that gets to feature and showcase it. The poem is still your work. It still belongs to you. You can publish it anywhere else you want in the future, in a book, in another journal, as a reprint. Just say it appeared in Radar first. But what I am contracting from you, what I want, because I love your poem so much, is to be able to say I was the first one. We were the discoverers of the poem, right? We were the first ones to publish it. And if you have published that work on your Facebook, on your blog, even if you take it down subsequently, or even an electronic journal that goes down, or by the way, guys, a print journal that goes out of print, because that happens a lot too. It is previously published. Your editors may make an exception for that. You can reach out and say, let me be transparent with you. This is the history of this poem or these poems. Is this something that you want? And then they'll tell you plainly, yes, we consider that previously published, or no, we could make
do that before you do that,
after you
in conjunction with sending it. Don't wait until they take it to deliver the news. There are journals who publish work that's been previously published though. So if that's an interest of yours, we're not shutting you down. We're just saying it's not part of what we do.
Just pay attention to the journal. Sequestrum is a great journal that does, I think, a whole reprint issue or a whole reprint contest. There's a couple of them. And so you should look into that if you have a reprint. Absolutely.
Do you publish translations?
We do.
Yep.
We haven't done it recently just because of low volume.
Yeah.
But that's simply
and we love them. We just
are there any considerations when submitting translations?
That's really its own sort of specialty genre, but I'll say this: it should just be very clear in your cover letter. We want to know about you. We want to know about the poet you've translated. I'm assuming usually it's the translator who is submitting the work, not the original poet. We want to know about you. We want to know about the poet you're translating. And it needs to be clear in your cover letter that you have permission from that poet to translate their work, or from their estate if they are no longer living. Don't just translate people without asking. Believe it or not, it happens. But that you have to have some relationship with the poet or the writer and their estate in order to undertake that endeavor, to be collaborative.
Okay. Thank you. So we're just out of time for today, but are there any last tips you want to share with potential published authors in terms of the submissions process?
I just would say that even though there is so much going on, it's the best news ever. And we are so enthused and excited to be a part of this community, maybe more than ever. And so we invite everyone in and really hope to see you some way, somewhere, in the writing art world. There's just no better place to be.
Absolutely. Poetry is alive and well. Art is alive and well. All writing is alive and well. And we're excited. It's a great moment to be a writer.
I want to thank everyone for being here today. Thank you so much, Dara and Rachel, for the presentation. I encourage everyone to visit Radar Poetry. Just a quick search, Radar Poetry. It will show up and read the poetry. And I don't think you're open to submissions now, unless you're watching this while it's being recorded later, after the recording later. You're going to open for your prize soon. And yeah, visit Radar Poetry and read it. And if you have any questions for me, you can always email support@authorspublish.com. Thank you, everyone, for your time. And thank you again, Dara and Rachel.
Thanks, Jacob.
Thank you
Well,
to Jacob and Authors Publish for